Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming along to our session. I know there's a lot of choice, and we're in the venue furthest away, so thank you for taking the time to come and join us. So books, they're the reason why we're all here today, why we're all here at the Jaipur Literature Festival. But over centuries, they've been burned, they've been hidden, they've been canonized, and more recently, they've been digitized, and they're also continuously being declared obsolete, especially as new technologies come into force. One thing that has happened consistently over the years is that they've also been banned. And we're going to be talking about all of these subjects today. However, we're not going to be talking about defending books out of sentiment, although I know that we all love a good book and we love curling up with a good book. And we love the feel and the smell of the printed book. But what we're going to talk about is why books continue to matter. Why are they important? Why are they relevant for children, for classrooms, for cultures? And why do we need to do everything we can to keep books in our ecosystem for the future? So I'm going to kick off by asking the same question to all of our panelists, and we've probably got slightly different perspectives here. But given that books have survived every technological and political upheaval so far, what do you think is the power of the book, and why has it been the one thing that no other medium has managed to replace? So Dominic, I'm going to start with you.
So my experience of reading books is that it's the only way really to engage with somebody else's mind, their thinking, their experiences, their thoughts on any matter. On a one-to-one basis. So if you think about all the other media, there's lots of noise around it, and actually sitting down and reading the words written down by somebody else that capture their thoughts is an extraordinary idea at a philosophical level, and I don't think you're ever going to replace that. I think the way that books are put together has changed over time, but they become one of the primary ways in which we capture our culture, and being a species that has a culture sets us apart. And so I'm looking forward to supporting books as I continue to work in education.
That's great. And Martin, you've written a book called The Written World, where you talk about the power of text to change lives. So, and you also talk about how stories intersect with different writing technologies over the years. So why do you think they've survived?
Yeah, I think very much working off what Dominic said, it's the sustained engagement with a topic. Though if you look into the distant past, we are maybe not technically talking about the book as a format that is pages that are bound on one side, because the earliest significant texts were written on clay tablets. In the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first significant longer texts. Then both in most parts of the world, they were written on scrolls. This is how many important texts were written down, and only later did the Romans invent what they called the codex, what we call the book, and it's a fantastic technology. But I think when we are talking about books, we are really talking about that sustained text that lasts, that leaves an imprint, rather than a particular delivery system, which is the book. The book is great because you can, rather than having to scroll from beginning to end, you can access the text in many different ways. But it's interesting to think that we are now in the internet age, we are scrolling down our computer screens again. We are reading tablets for the first time in maybe 2,000 years. And if you look at images of early scribes, the way they sit down with their writing pads, they look exactly like we do today with our tablets. So it's interesting that these technologies disappear and reappear in different forms, but what remains the same, I think, is precisely what you talked about.
And Ranjit, as a poet and cultural thinker, why do you think books persist?
You know, it's customary to think of the human being as a speaking animal, but I think it's also true that we are reading animals, we are debating animals, And the book is the invitation to that kind of opening of the imagination. Martin, I was intrigued to hear you speak of the book as a delivery system, which is a phrase I usually associate with missiles. I tend to think of retrieval systems. But as you know, when Manutius began to produce the original of the paperback in late 15th century Venice, he referred to them, each of these was referred to as an enchiridion, which could mean a handheld book, but it goes back to a Bronze Age Greek word that means a projectile, something you hurl. And I like to hang on to that idea of, it seems aggressive, but I think there's room for thinking about books as vehicles of ideas, books as vehicles of debate, and it is the key medium across, the form might change, the technology might change, but it is through books and narratives and stories and allegories and parables that we discuss the key urgencies of our times. So that's why the book is important.
And do you think that they're unique when we look at other forms of media? We think about film, we think about television, we think about gaming. Do you think books are unique in the way that they help us emotionally, culturally, debating-wise?
I'd like to see books as part of a much larger mediatic landscape, and we've spoken about this earlier too. Particularly when you think of the South Asian context, there's this marvelous concept of literacy that goes beyond the written word. There's a kind of oral literacy. Theorist and translator Velcharu Narayan Rao has spoken of oral literacy. So what is the book? Is it the printed object? Wonderful, we all love that. But the book exceeds the page in many, many ways. And I'd like us to think back to an extreme instance. I'm thinking of Ray Bradbury's novel, Fahrenheit 451, where books are banned, books are burnt, but there are individuals who embody and incarnate the book. They are the living book. So I'd like to hold on to notions of performance, orality, utterance, when we think of what the culture of the book can mean.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I think we've all got a fondness for the printed book and the way we can hold it, the way we can smell it, the way we can see it. But times are changing, aren't they? And technology is changing. And Dominic, we do forget that the book itself is a technology. And so do you think when we talk about books being lost as a technology or books becoming obsolete, it has survived all of these different changes? Are we just worrying too much about that?
I sometimes worry that we do worry too much about the technology just changing. There was a book, I seem to recall a book called The Martian Chronicles, and reading that in the first few chapters, the Martians would sit down to listen to a book. And this was a remarkable thing to me as a teenager when I read this. And so that idea that you could listen to a book, I think, has almost become a reality for all of us. I think there is a distinction between engaging with the words and the words alone, be that listening or reading, and having the imagery put to you in film. And there's something very different about the levels of engagement that you have with the ideas being put across. I am a very biased visual learner, so I like pictures, but I know that if I genuinely want to understand the picture, I need to go to the person who came up with the picture and look and see what they said and wrote about it. I think the oral tradition is great, but speech, just like today, is transitory. It's going to disappear. And actually writing stuff down is committing to the thought. And there's a desperate trend among young people where they are scared of having opinions sometimes. Wow. And actually getting them to write stuff down actually forces them to have an opinion and be able to talk about that opinion. And actually very well put earlier on is this idea of the book, the story, the deep engagement with it. Then you take that into the conversation with other people. Yeah. So I don't see the idea of the book disappearing. The technology that the book uses to convey its messages may well do. And I think Kurt Vonnegut used to write on blank wallpaper. He had a big roll, so when he wrote, he actually wrote scrolling in the mix there. The other thought I had is during the course of my education, I went to university at a time where there weren't really computers to use. So I had to queue up to get, I would have to queue up to borrow a paper for 4 hours. And if I didn't take it back, I'd get fined. And later on, when the next degree I went to, I was involved with microfiche. The internet was just about there. And then most recently, when I came to do my education master's degree, that everything was available on PDFs. And the risk of that is, if you know what you're looking for, you can hunt down the bits in the books very, very quickly. But it does mean that you are missing out on reading the whole text if you're not careful. And there's something of a loss in that, potentially.
Yeah. Would you say the same about audiobooks, do you think? Because we're talking about different formats and oral traditions, and audiobooks are a format that's on the rise in many parts of the world, and it's increased accessibility to books for many people. It's brought books to people that have never read books before.
That's quite right. I think my wife uses them so she doesn't have to speak to me. That's something that she has. She prefers to do is to listen to the books. I think I quite like the radio as well in the background, but I'm very conscious in both situations. I'm only half paying attention to the audio word. So
you don't remember as much.
I would say you need to be reading it if you're going to remember it.
Yeah. I guess people learn and recall in different ways, don't they? But Martin, looking at it from a world historical perspective, what role do you think books have played in sustaining civilization itself?
Yeah, it's interesting since I'm always biased towards literature, but the earliest texts, written texts, were not literary texts. They were really more like accounting technologies. It was recording economic transactions, bureaucratic, statecraft. So it's really the accountants who invented writing, not the storytellers. The storytellers came a little later, but once they got their hands on technology, or once some of these accountants wrote down stories, these written texts became very powerful, including, I already mentioned, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Fragments of it have been found all over the Near East, so it's clear that it was a kind of form of soft power. This is also the beginning of territorial empires, the rise of cities. So all of that is kind of a cultural package. The other, for me, the most, and when I looked at the whole history of written texts in some sense, for me the most significant turn wasn't there from the beginning, is one that comes, I think, very naturally to us because our world has been shaped by it, and that is the fact that some of these written texts, if you remember that they started as accounting practices, became sacred. So this association of writing, originally very profane technology, and the sacred, I think was decisive. And today, I think it's almost impossible to think of even the concept of religion without writing, right? Basically,
Absolutely.
all the religions, major religions, have texts, the idea of a sacred text in the background.
Yeah.
So, but it's good to remember that was sort of a byproduct, if you will, of the print revolution. And I think we've been living in a world shaped by that association of the sacred and a writing technology.
Yeah, we will continue to be so long into the future, I'm sure. Yeah. Let's talk about children. And Martin, Dominic, you work in a school, and children books have often been the first place where curiosity, empathy, critical thinking are practiced. So why does reading still matter so profoundly in those formative years?
Well, I think the inevitability is that the body of knowledge is still predominantly written down. So actually acquiring the ability to read is the route into that. I think reading and writing are two of the most fundamental skills across, I think, all of the cultures that have formal education. And it's a really important part of a child's life to be able to engage with books, because it is about engaging with a wider community than simply their immediate contacts in the room. So it's important that all children are surrounded by books. Again, we sort of drift into, well, what do we mean by books? I would argue, well, you need to be surrounded by reading. It's good to see the adults reading, using the read content as prompts to their own conversations and the like.
And good for children to go up being read to by parents and carers.
Absolutely right. So I have two children. I read to them until they both have explained to me that I was getting the voices wrong and they would read it themselves. But it's a great introduction and a great way of bonding with children is to have that shared experience of reading stories together.
We were talking earlier with some publishers about why reading is so important, and I think we often forget that if we aren't reading, we find it difficult to find work. So reading is important for the economy, reading is important for health, so being able to read for well-being but also read for genuine health concerns, etc. So there's many benefits to reading that need to be instilled from a young age. Martin, do you think that books train a particular kind of thinking, so slow, interpretive, reflective, that is possibly increasingly rare elsewhere, and that's kind of those skills we need to bring out of children as well? It's not simply telling them to read a book, it's teaching them these skills that go around understanding what they're reading and talking about what they're reading.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, as everyone knows, younger kids, probably because of the smartphone and maybe other reasons as well, have a really hard time. And I think it's important to realize that reading sustained texts is not natural. It does not come naturally to us. It's really a practice, it's a training, it's a discipline. And I think especially since we're seeing the training, the induction into that kind of sustained attention is eroding, I think that rather than just wringing our hands and saying, oh, the young people are not reading anymore, I think we have to remember that it is a training, a discipline. It's like going to the gym or doing yoga, I think. And there are some teachers who are doing that successfully. There's a philosophy professor at Penn who is basically just gathering students on Sundays for a couple of hours, and the phones stay outside and people read on their own. There's no distractions. And it's in that environment that they can build up those muscles again. Yeah. So that I think that's how I'm trying to think about it, really, as something that requires training, because it's not natural.
Ranjit.
I'd push that a little further. I mean, we're talking here of the attention deficit economy that a certain kind of digital culture promotes. But in the world of the book, it's not only attention. I think there's a further nuance there. I think we're also talking about the kind of attentiveness that reading and an exposure to books brings about. Because when you're immersed in a book, you're also coming up against surprises and epiphanies. You're making discoveries. And they're not confined to the pages of the book. It's also an account about the world, about other people. So I think there are fundamental possibilities of encounter that books make possible, especially for young people, for children, which I suspect other kinds of technologies, just in their physicality, the absence of the haptic experience, slow time, I think this is a fundamentally different experience in encounter, in acceptance, in thinking of people and places and predicaments that are different from yourself and your own.
And I think talking about it being a practice that you learn and a muscle, it's also a habit, no? Right. You've got to make time to read, and I think as the attention economy is increasingly being competed with, then actually saying to yourself, no, I'm going to read every day. I'm going to find 10 minutes a day to read. How do we sustain the reading habit amongst children, Dominic?
It's a really interesting question. So I have a 15-year-old son, and he loves strategy games on the computer. And there's a great argument against gaming and computing, but he's prepared to read tens of thousands of words for these strategy games. If I hand him a book, it's like a millstone being hounded across.
And yet he grew up being surrounded by books and being read to. But this is something which we as educators need to recognise is where are the opportunities? How do we get young people to engage deeply with attention? And one of the great failings of
adults is that they only really recall how they got educated. And so the great challenge for us educators is I don't really care how I get them to read deeply. For my son, it's like fantastic. And in fact, there's been plenty that's come off that has inclined him towards history. And actually, I suspect as he matures, he will want to engage with the history texts that are coming his way. So it is about not being narrow-minded. And we've sort of talked a little bit about the changing technology and the changing way in which we engage with ideas. And actually, the sophistication of some of the gaming environments and the need to think carefully and strategize is something which is quite alien to me. I can think of nothing worse than spending 6 hours gaming. Yeah. But I would be very happy to read myself. So in a school setting, it is about finding the way to get people to access books in whichever form they're going to come in. So they are deeply engaging with the content. And that's my great fear, is actually the generation at the moment is so obsessed with the reels and being satisfied with 10 seconds that they're never really thinking about very much at all. And so actually sitting down and engaging with text in whichever way is something which I think is very important for us educators to recognise.
I think it's about redefining reading, isn't it? So it's going back to, is it just books, or it doesn't matter what they're reading as long as they're reading and engaging.
Just to pick up from what you've just said, Dominic, it struck me as you were speaking that reading doesn't happen in a vacuum at all. I've been preoccupied with the changing shape of the library. I remember about 20 years ago, the British Council, or more, the British Council in Bombay decided that they would get rid of what had until then been an open access shelving system, and they grandly said, we're going to put the catalog online and you can look for whatever you like. And I remember thinking, this is a catastrophe. The best thing that can happen to you is that you turn a corner in a library and you were looking for philosophy and you find something else in anthropology or whatever it might be, and you make these extraordinary discoveries that could potentially change your life. Now, that's not really going to happen if you already know what you're looking for, or if you have to look through a digital catalog. You might well find what you're looking for, but you'll never find the things that you didn't know you were looking for and which could be transformative.
So the power of discoverability in the physical space, be it a bookshop, be it a library, be it a classroom, is increasingly important.
And I think one of the observations I'd make about bookshops, actual physical bookshops, has a similar experience for me. So I frequently like to go and browse around bookshops. What I've discovered with Amazon is that Amazon knows me far too well. So it will only put things in front of me that it thinks that I will find interesting because of what I've read before. And actually, I want to be surprised.
Yeah, I think that's a big danger of shopping online, isn't it? For anything, not just books, but certainly for books. And chances are you will like the books that they recommend, but again, it takes away that element of surprise.
And I think restricts growth is the issue. So it is about, I think the truth I've discovered coming late back into education as a teacher is you don't grow unless you're doing stuff you haven't done before. So if you just keep reading the same old stories with the same old characters, you're not going to be gaining a great deal from it.
And I think your tastes do change as you grow older, don't they? When I think back to what I was reading as a teenager compared to what you read now, then your tastes do change, I would say.
I don't want to think about it.
I want to talk about an important issue here, which is about books under threat. So book banning, censorship, and across the world we're seeing books being banned, challenged, or removed from shelves. And what do we think that society actually fears when it fears books? So Martin, I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, well, the United States, which is where I live, is one of the places that's been in the news a lot about that. And there are various forms of book banning, although it's a strong term, and sometimes I wonder whether we need a slightly weaker term because it often meant like in some local library, a book was, let's say, reshelved from a middle school section to a high school section. In any case, books are available on Amazon. So I think when today we talk about book banning, certainly in the US, it's not like suddenly you couldn't access a certain book anymore. So I do sometimes think that there's been a slightly exaggerated reaction to something that's not great. And yeah, so I've been on various discussions about this issue, as you can imagine, over the years, and talking to librarians
Of course.
And booksellers about it. They sometimes come to a more nuanced understanding and also talk about the fact that there were younger, especially in the last 5, 6, 7 years, lack of a better word, woke employees who were, for example, removing Harry Potter from the shelves because of the controversies around Rowling and so on and so forth. So I would say both sides of the political spectrum have engaged in these practices. Book banning sounds extreme to me.
Yeah, I think though in the US there are court cases going on, aren't there? There's legal actions against book banning. So to me that feels a little bit extreme. But yeah, Russia's a different context.
Yeah, the way you phrased it, you wondered what society might gain from banning books.
Correct.
But in some cases, it's just the naked power of the state. And those of you who are following the situation in Russia will know that over the whole of the last year, there have been sweeping actual bans on books. There's at least nearly 90 titles, ranging from Zizek's works on philosophy to Ryu Murakami, the filmmaker, and anything that has anything to do remotely with LGBTQI plus issues, that has anything to do with drug use, that is critical of Russian policy or speaks of the invasion of Ukraine and so on and so forth. And that has very serious consequences. Managers of bookstores have been arrested. Distributors have been asked to pulp books. That is grim. Yeah. That speaks to
That's a
project.
Control of ideas.
Not only a control of ideas, it's also an attempt to diminish your human possibilities as a reader. What kinds of ideas might you entertain? What kinds of views of the world might you form? It's more than abstract ideas. The idea is to create, the project is to create a much narrower, more controllable human being who would then be less than human, I think. And certain kinds of states would be very happy with that.
And going back to the education environment, Dominic, what's the impact of that in schools?
So there's a balance to be struck between banning books and age-appropriate content. So it's perfectly reasonable for schools, and to some extent schools that are providing a value-based education. So in the UK we have Catholic schools, for example, we have Islamic schools, and they will want to curate the content that is presented to the pupils, as happens at all universities as well. So there are reading lists. The point about banning books is about restricting ideas, the controllable population. I would say at the point at which we've got to in our evolution with the emergence of AI and open access to AI, it is the worst possible thing that we can do. I mean, so you cannot kill an idea, it goes on existing. What are you so scared of? You need to generate the argument that takes the idea to something else. But banning it is not the approach. I'm resistant as a headmaster to have any form of banned books. We talked about the difference between banning and censorship. As a headmaster, I am prepared to censor based on age appropriateness.
I think that is different. I think that is different. Let's open the floor for questions. I've got one down the front here and then one at the back there. So can we start at the front here? I think there's a microphone just on the chair here. Is that one? No.
No, it looks like a delivery system. Well, I was thinking I was
The microphone's just come in, it's here.
It's rowing books. I thought
All right, so hello, I'm in my
Hi.
mid-20s, and I think there is a difference between a summary and reading a proper text. I know there's these apps that come up which say, read Aristotle in, like 1 hour, and how can one read the Nicomachean Ethics that takes months to get through within an hour? I know you talk about, getting people to read no matter what it is. I disagree with it, Emma, respectfully, but my question is for the panelists. How does one persuade people my age or younger to sit down, put effort in, and soak a thing completely rather than just get a summary?
It's a very good question. Does anyone want, Dominic?
I like a good summary. I like a good summary because it gives me an idea of what is being thought about. If you go to most decent books, they will begin with an introduction that usually provides a very articulate summary about what is going to get said in the book. So there is a little bit of marketing involved in these summaries, and it is, I would say, if you use the summaries carefully, you will be able to select what you want to invest your time and energy in. What I think I would observe is it's frequently the case that the summary will talk an awful lot about sort of hows, but not whys, and the whys will come in the deeper reading of the text. So if your interest is piqued by the summary, that's a good sign that you're going to get something from reading more deeply about it.
I totally agree, and just to add a historical perspective, because I also am pro-summary, that in fact summaries are basically as old as written literature. And it's interesting, especially in the ancient world, it was very important to create these annotated bibliographies and kind of the summa of knowledge, these kind of small encyclopedias. So it's actually throughout the written world or the written record, summaries play an important role, including the ones you pointed out. But I think, and that's behind your question, which I also completely agree with, it's a balancing act, and we can't just stop with summaries. That's, I think, what I take to be your point, and this is, I think, what we are trying to kind of puzzle out in one way or the other.
It depends on who's writing the summary. And I'm thinking here of a beautiful essay on the back flap text by Roberto Calasso, who, in addition to being a brilliant novelist and scholar, was also a great publisher. And he calls it a letter to a stranger. So if you can write a summary that is a letter to a stranger, that's a bridge, that's an invitation, you have to have the right tonality and texture to a summary. It's a literary work.
We had a question at the back.
It's called the art of the publisher.
So, yeah. It's easy to talk about book banning in authoritarian states. What happens when books get banned in so-called democracies, like Mein Kampf in Germany, satanic verses in India? How far does censorship go? And how far can we limit the reading?
I'm not sure I fully heard the question.
Yeah,
Can you repeat it?
We couldn't hear it very clearly, sorry. Can you just ask the question
Okay.
quite succinctly and loudly?
And
Well,
hold the
I was-
microphone very closely to your mouth.
I thought I was being succinct. I said it's easy to talk about book banning in authoritarian states like Russia, but what happens with book banning in democracies like the satanic verses in India, or say a Mein Kampf in Germany, or Je suis Charlie in France? How far does that go?
We're all looking at you, Martin.
Well, I think when I said earlier, let me put it this way, this has to do with writing technologies. And I think these days, I think the reason why I hesitated to call what's happening in the States book banning is that anyone who wants to get their hands at a book basically can if they are a little bit clever looking around it. And I think that's true of all of the books today that you mention. So this is different from, in Russia, for example, there was the Samizdat, the underground distribution network, and in fact, this is sort of what the internet started out in the early 90s. So we have the whole world is Samizdat today, which is not to say it doesn't matter whether books are banned, and I think what you are saying but it means something different, and this is what I mean. We almost need a different word where things are still sort of available, but they're sort of banned, but officially they're maybe not in certain libraries, but maybe you can get it with a VPN. I mean, it's a very complicated, or at least a summary on ChatGPT, or maybe ChatGPT won't give you a summary because it violates content restrictions. So it's very closely connected to technology, and therefore a really complex system.
And certainly in experience that I've seen, if a book's banned, it becomes the most popular book in the country.
Exactly. I'll just speak to the Mein Kampf.
Of course.
Just to speak to one of your examples, Mein Kampf. The reason it was banned in post-war Germany is very obvious. There were 12 years of experience of where that book, which details exactly what this man is going to do. So there were 12 years of horror and violence and viciousness and annihilation. So there's a reason why the ban on Mein Kampf is part of a larger denazification which post-war Germany went through. So I don't think we also need to think about the historical context in which certain kinds of books emerge and why they might be banned and what consequences they've had or might have.
Okay, where's the microphone? Can we go, just over here on the end? And then we'll come down to the front. We've got 5 minutes, so.
Yeah. My question is to the headmaster on stage. Especially in a country like India, when there are many ideas that might not be accepted, one way or another, LGBTQ, whatever these ideas are, and you're running an educational institution when you're trying to stock your library and all of that, I'm wondering how you think about this. If your very legitimacy can be questioned because of you supporting what the zeitgeist believes is a bit too far, how do you think about that, and how do you make exceptions or say this is not worth going that far into? How do you make those choices as a headmaster?
So as an educationist, I want to teach people how to think for themselves and come to their own views about these things. One of the great things about coming to India is a remarkably rich and diverse culture that has long-standing and quite often forgotten histories in academia, which I'm very keen to bring to the forefront. I have a very, very good school council. So the pupils on my school council will engage with me about how they think we are running the school, and they are immersed in the zeitgeist and are pushing on the edges of it the whole time. But what I found very, very promising, and I find this with all the young people I come across, is actually they are encouraged when adults are prepared to have a dialogue with them. So not to simply turn around and go, that's wrong, and move on, but to actually engage in the concepts, really talk through them in a very detailed way. So I'm not scared of this, and I'm very happy to have that dialogue with the children in my care. Thus far, the community we have at Shrewsbury in Bhopal, including the parents, are very happy with that approach.
Final question, just at the front here, please. Yeah, it's coming. Just here.
Hi, I was curious, there was no mention of book clubs as part of a good reading culture. So I wanted to get some brief comments on, do you see book clubs as relevant? And second is, as technology changes, how do you see book clubs evolving? So Ranjit, looks like you're involved in libraries. So is there something around evolving book clubs? Because I think that could be a good way to promote a reading culture that's not coercive.
Couldn't agree more. I think what we see here, for instance, the Literature Festival is sustained and nourished by this whole ecology of
It's
book
one
clubs.
big book club.
It's one big book club, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, what you're speaking to is also the need for a community and a consistency of practice. I think it brings together all of these motifs. Reading as a practice, slow time, community, sharing, the discussion of what books can mean. So it's crucial, I think, yeah.
I think on a positive note, I got my copy of Heart Lamps signed by the author yesterday, and Heart Lamps had been chosen by the staff, the faculty, as the first book as Shrewsbury International. We've just finished our first term, but that's our first staff book club book. And I was very excited about the fact this is not an idea that came from me, it came from the staff room. I'm very keen for us to continue with it. So we'll be doing some fiction, but also some education works as well along the way. But I think engaging in a community to talk about specific books is a really good way of doing that deep engagement with somebody else's thinking and with each other as well.
And talking about technology, I think what technology's really allowed us to do is to create international book clubs and have debates online with our friends in different parts of the world who may have very different perspectives on the book that they're reading. And also, again, that accessibility that we talked about. So if you're unable, for whatever reason, to hold or read a physical book, you can at least now have the audio version, the ebook version, the large print version, the Braille version. So technology has really allowed us to increase access to books, and that can only be a good thing, I think. And
Sorry, I have to do my thing about translation.
yes.
It's amazing that you mentioned Heart Lamp. I think it's crucial that we read across languages. I think it allows us to go through various gear shifts, to realize that we are different people in different languages and what consequences that has for action. And particularly in this country, Bharat ek bahubhashya mahadvip hai. We are a continent of many languages. We're not just a subcontinent. So particularly coming out of South Asia, I think we need to open ourselves out to many languages and their literatures and nourish ourselves that way.
And I think concluding our debate for today, I think we feel hopeful, probably confident that books are going to continue long beyond our lifetime and for future generations. But we shouldn't take it for granted, and we must continue to nurture the readers of the future. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for coming, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions.
Thank you, Emma.